In a time when gods walked among mortals, and the threads of destiny wove their grand tapestry across the 9 realms, one name stood above all others. Thor, mighty, unyielding, the god of thunder. This is a tale of courage and treachery, of love and loss, where immortals clash for the fate of Asgard and beyond. From the golden halls of the All-Father to the shadowy realms of deceit comes an epic that began with one simple truth: destiny cannot be denied. You are about to hear the saga of the mighty Thor, written by Tim Maxwell, inspired by the vision of Stan Lee himself. A story where gods, mortals, and legends collide. Prologue. Behold the mighty Thor, god of thunder, prince of Asgard, son of the All-Father Odin. Among the immortal denizens of the fabled realm, there is none more noble, none more daring, than he who wields Mjolnir, the enchanted hammer that commands the very storm. His is a tale unlike any other, a saga that reaches across the vast expanse of the cosmos, from the resplendent halls of Asgard to the bustling streets of Midgard, where gods and mortals entwine in destiny's unyielding grasp. Here begins the saga of Thor, a narrative as grand as the stars themselves. In an age where legends are immortal and the eternal battle rages, trolls, demons, and forces of chaos rise to challenge the might of the realm eternal. This is a tale of darkness most profound, of sinister magic and monsters who would unravel the very fabric of the universe. Yet amidst the turmoil and terror, this is also a tale of love unyielding and devotion unbroken. It is a story of courage that defies the grave, of faith so enduring that even Hela, the dreaded goddess of death, cannot extinguish its light. For what can surpass the love of a father for his son, the bond of brotherhood forged in fire, or the divine affection of a god for a mortal? Come now to Asgard, the home of the gods, where adventure beckons and destiny waits. Journey alongside Thor as he embarks on a quest to reclaim the imperial scepter of power, to vanquish the monstrous, many-lived Mangog, to rescue the star-crossed enchantress who holds his heart, and to stand defiant against the shadow of Ragnarok, the fateful day when heaven and earth shall shatter and all may perish. This is the tale of Thor, the Thunderer, a saga that will echo across eternity. Chapter 1. Embrace the Fates. Dr. Donald Blake jolted upright in his bed, gasping for air, his heart pounding like a war drum. The nightmare had ended, leaving him drenched in sweat, trembling in its aftermath. The same dream, vivid and unrelenting, night after night. But tonight it had been worse, more violent, more real. What did it mean? Why did it haunt him so? Was he losing his mind? Morning brought little solace. At the hospital, his hands, steady as ever, performed the most delicate microsurgery, saving yet another life. But the weight of the recurring dreams hung over him like a dark cloud. During a brief respite, he confided in Nurse Jane Foster, his fiancée and closest confidant. Her concern mirrored his own. "There must be a reason, Don," she said softly, her eyes searching his. "Dreams like that don't just happen." Before they could delve further, an urgent call interrupted them. A devastating accident in Norway had left an Olympic athlete's foot partially severed. Only Dr. Blake's unmatched surgical skill could offer hope. He couldn't refuse. Hours later, he was on a plane bound for Norway. The operation was a success, but the strain had taken its toll. Exhausted and restless, Blake sought solace in the serene yet imposing Norwegian mountains. Perhaps their silent, ancient wisdom held the answers he sought, or at least a reprieve from the nightmares. He wandered deeper into the peaks, drawn by a force he couldn't name, until he stumbled upon a hidden cave. There, in the dim light, he saw it. The hammer. It was unmistakable, the very mallet that had haunted his dreams. Gnarled and ancient, its rough-hewn surface seemed as ageless as the stones around it. It lay nestled within a bed of glowing, white-hot coals, untouched by the fire's searing heat. A leather thong bound its handle, worn yet unyielding, as if waiting for its destined wielder. Blake stared, transfixed, as words began to shimmer into existence above the enchanted mallet. Only one may grasp the hammer of Thor. Only one may claim enchanted Mjolnir. If him thou art, reach out and seize thy destiny. His breath caught. This was no coincidence. The dreams, the inexplicable pull to this place, it had all led to this moment. Without hesitation, he reached into the blazing coals. To his astonishment, the heat didn't burn. He felt nothing but a strange, unshakable certainty. This was meant to be. Fingers closed around the handle, and the cave erupted in blinding light. A surge of power coursed through him, reshaping his very being. When the brilliance faded, Donald Blake was no more. In his place stood the mighty Thor, god of thunder, his towering form clad in celestial armor, Mjolnir firm in his grasp. But with this transformation came a heavy truth. Thor, strongest and noblest of the gods, would soon face trials that would test not only his strength, but his very soul. For the destiny of the universe hung by a thread, and his newfound power might yet bring about its undoing. And so began the saga of Thor, a tale of courage, tragedy, and a god's unyielding quest to protect both his world and ours. The rainbow bridge shimmered beneath Thor's boots, a prism of light stretching between realms. Each step carried him closer to Asgard, the realm of his birth, yet his heart was a storm of anticipation and doubt. The bridge was resplendent, a testament to the god's majesty, but the thunder god's thoughts were far from its beauty. He was going home, but not as the brash, untested godling he once was. The gates of Asgard loomed ahead, carved from stone that seemed to gleam with an inner fire. Beyond them stood the city itself, a radiant sprawl of golden spires and celestial gardens, alive with the hum of immortal life. But Asgard, for all its splendor, was no stranger to shadow. Its beauty concealed intrigues as sharp as any blade and rivalries as bitter as a winter wind. Thor knew this well. The great throne room awaited, its vaulted ceiling seemingly endless, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting the triumphs of the gods. At the heart of it all sat Odin, the All-Father, his presence as commanding as the sun. His single eye burned with a wisdom that could pierce through time, and his voice, when it came, was like thunder rolling over the plains. "Come forward, my son," Odin intoned. Thor knelt before the throne, his head bowed, though his mind churned with questions. He felt the weight of his father's gaze, felt it peeling back the layers of his being. When he looked up, it was into the face of a being who was not only his father, but the way, the word, the wonder. A god who embodied all that Asgard was and could be. "You have returned from your exile," Odin said, his voice grave yet laced with something softer, almost like pride. "The lesson has been learned. You are no longer the reckless youth who gloried in strength above all else. You have walked among mortals and tasted humility. Your heart has grown, as was my intent." Thor frowned, the words both a balm and a wound. "You stripped me of my memory, father. You cast me among the mortals without explanation. You let me believe I was one of them." Odin nodded. "And would you have learned humility if you had known your birthright? Would you have come to understand that strength without wisdom is a weapon turned inward, cutting its wielder as deeply as its foe?" Thor had no answer. He clenched his fists, feeling the phantom weight of Mjolnir, his hammer, in his grasp. The lessons of his exile were still raw, but he could not deny their truth. "You are home now, my son," Odin continued, "but you return not to peace, for Asgard's glory is shadowed by those who would see it fall. Your half-brother Loki awaits you." At the mention of Loki, Thor stiffened. The trickster god, sly and cunning, had always been a thorn in his side. Yet Loki was also blood, a connection he could not sever. "Beware, Thor," Odin said, his voice lowering. "Loki's schemes grow darker with each passing day. Your strength will be needed, but so too will your newfound wisdom. For the challenges ahead will test not only your might, but your heart." Thor rose, his mind a tempest. The halls of Asgard called to him, but so too did the shadows within its brilliance. His journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The golden halls of Asgard gleamed in the light of the eternal sky. Odin sat upon the great throne, the All-Father's gaze distant yet unyielding. At his side, upon a pedestal that seemed carved from the cosmos itself, rested the sceptre royal. Its jewelled surface shimmered with an inner light, a beacon of authority and power. Every god in Asgard knew that the one who held this sceptre held the fate of the realm in their grasp. Thor and Loki stood before Odin, their postures contrasting sharply. Thor, tall and steadfast, radiated an aura of purpose. Loki, his lean frame taut with ambition, wore a practiced mask of solemnity, though his sharp green eyes betrayed a flicker of cunning. "The time has come," Odin began, his voice resonating through the vast chamber, "for the throne of Asgard to find its future. The sceptre royal must pass to one worthy to bear its weight." Thor's heart swelled with both pride and apprehension, while Loki's smile curled ever so slightly, hidden beneath a feigned air of contemplation. "You, my sons," Odin continued, "stand before me as heirs. But the sceptre is not a mere prize. It is a burden, a symbol of Asgard's strength, wisdom and unity. It demands more than power. It demands heart, duty and sacrifice." Balder, standing to the side as guardian of the sceptre, bowed his head in reverence. Though his sword was at his side, his loyalty was unwavering, his very presence a silent promise to protect the sceptre with his life. Thor stepped forward. "Father, I am honoured by your words, but my heart is torn. Before I can take on such a responsibility, I must resolve a matter on Midgard. Jane Foster." "Silence!" Odin's command echoed like thunder. The realm trembles with danger. Mangog stirs in the shadows, a storm of hatred that could rend Asgard asunder. "You dare speak of mortal concerns while the fate of gods hangs by a thread." Thor flinched, but held his ground. "I do not wish to defy you, All-Father, yet my heart belongs to both Midgard and Asgard. I cannot choose one over the other without understanding the full weight of my choice." Loki, ever the opportunist, watched this exchange with a smirk hidden behind a bowed head. His chance to exploit Thor's divided loyalties was close at hand. Odin's face softened for a moment, then hardened once more. "There will be no talk of Earth, not now. Asgard's survival is paramount." He gestured dismissively. "You will remain here, both of you, until my decree is made final." Thor's shoulders sagged under the weight of his father's command. Loki, however, had already begun spinning his web. Later that evening, as the golden light of Asgard dimmed into its soft twilight, Thor stood at the edge of the Rainbow Bridge. His heart ached, torn between the call of duty and the pull of love. The shimmering expanse of Bifrost stretched before him, a radiant promise of escape. "You brood too much, brother," came Loki's voice, smooth and honeyed. He approached with the grace of a serpent, his hands clasped behind his back. "Our father can be unwavering, but I bring good news." Thor turned to him, his eyes filled with both hope and suspicion. "Good news? From you, Loki?" Loki chuckled, the sound like a dagger sheathed in silk. "I admit I am rarely the bearer of joy, but this time I assure you my tidings are true. Father has reconsidered. He understands the weight on your heart. He has granted you leave to return to Midgard." Thor's brow furrowed. "He has? Truly?" "Truly," Loki said, his voice unwavering. "Would I jest about such a thing?" Thor, eager and filled with longing, nodded. "Thank you, brother. If you speak truth, you have my gratitude." Loki's smile widened. "Go quickly, before he changes his mind. Bifrost awaits." Thor, too consumed by his desire to see Jane once more, did not pause to question Loki's motives. With a final glance toward Asgard's golden spires, he strode onto the bridge, his cape billowing behind him like a storm cloud. Heimdall, ever watchful, said nothing as Thor passed, his expression unreadable. As the thunder god disappeared into the rainbow's light, Loki stood at the bridge's edge, his smirk now unmasked. "Run to your mortal, dear brother," he whispered, "and when you return, you'll find your precious Asgard teetering on the brink of ruin. The sceptre shall be mine." Behind him, the shadows of Asgard seemed to deepen, as though Mangog himself stirred in response to Loki's deceit. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Sovereignty. The golden halls of Asgard trembled with the force of Odin's fury. His departure had been swift, as had the words he spoke to no one in particular before ascending the steps to the chamber where the ancient Odin's sleep awaited him. He had not known such betrayal from his own flesh and blood. Thor, the son he had raised, had defied him, had cast aside his duties for the whims of a mortal. And yet there was Loki standing by him. Not once had Loki faltered in his devotion to the All-Father, even as the winds of chaos howled outside Asgard's mighty walls. There was a certain comfort in that. Loki's smirk, as ever, was an unspeakable mask, but it was the mask of loyalty, at least for now. When Odin departed to rest in the deep, eternal sleep that only a god of his power could withstand, Loki's mind began its subtle machinations. Alone in the vast halls, he whispered words that turned to dark magic, beckoning a shadowy figure from beyond the mortal realm. Karnilla, Queen of the Norns, stepped into the chamber, her raven-black hair swirling around her like a living storm. Her beauty was as wicked as it was captivating, the very embodiment of forbidden allure. She moved toward Loki, her eyes full of cunning and malice. "You called for me, trickster," she purred, her voice smooth as velvet. "I have a task for you, my queen," Loki said, his grin spreading like a snake ready to strike. "A task that will ensure the throne of Asgard is mine." The Norn Queen listened intently as Loki outlined his scheme. He needed Balder, the noble and true-hearted, to fall under his sway. For Balder was the one god who could challenge Loki's ascension to the throne. And what better way to bring him low than with the poison of desire? Karnilla, for all her dark powers, had one ability unmatched by any other. She could seduce even the most virtuous of hearts. "I shall see it done," Karnilla whispered, her eyes glinting with the promise of treachery. The nights that followed were filled with lies and shadows. Loki, ever the master of deception, watched from the shadows as Karnilla worked her magic. Balder, the shining knight of Asgard, the epitome of courage and loyalty, found himself drawn to the dark enchantress. His heart, usually so steadfast and pure, wavered beneath the weight of her charms. It was enough. The once untouchable Balder, his moral compass shattered by Karnilla's whispered promises, was now under her thrall. She had succeeded where no force of arms could have. Balder's once unswerving loyalty was now to Loki, who watched from afar with a cold smile. With Balder subdued, Loki made his move. He slipped into the chamber where the sceptre royal lay, guarded by its most devoted protector. The sceptre glistened in its resting place, untouched by time, its power undeniable. But with a simple spell and a whispered incantation, the sceptre was his. Loki, drunk with triumph, raised the golden staff high, feeling its power course through him. Asgard was now his. The gods were but pawns in his game, the sceptre royal an extension of his will. Word spread quickly through Asgard. Odin's absence was not the only thing that left the gods uneasy. The realm itself seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as Loki, now seated upon the throne, issued commands that shattered the tranquility of their once stable world. Sif, the warrior goddess and Balder's closest ally, felt the cold bite of betrayal in her heart. She knew, as did Balder, that Thor would never bow to Loki's usurpation. Thor, though flawed in his heart, was the one god who would never accept a villain on the throne. Sif, her mind sharp and calculating, knew what must be done. She found Balder, still under the subtle influence of Karnilla's spell, but struggling to break free. "We must go to Earth," she told him. "We must warn Thor." But before they could make their move, a rumble shook the very foundation of Asgard. From the shadows came a force far darker than Loki's treachery, Mangog, the monstrous engine of destruction, whose very existence was a curse on the realm. The warning came too late. Mangog was already making his way toward the Rainbow Bridge, a beast so powerful that even the gods had never known its like. As the alarm sounded, Balder's face darkened. "Only Thor can stop this," he said, his voice filled with dread. "Without his hammer, Asgard will fall." Sif and Balder knew they had little time. They rushed to the Bifrost, where the shimmering light of the Rainbow Bridge stretched before them. Their mission was clear. Save Thor, bring him back to Asgard and restore balance before Loki's reign could turn the cosmos to dust. Meanwhile, on Earth, Thor, unaware of the storm brewing in Asgard, was with Jane Foster, his heart caught between two worlds. The love he felt for her was real, but duty called him back to his divine heritage. The longer he stayed with her, the harder it became to tear himself away. But his departure was inevitable. The weight of his destiny was always pressing, always pulling him back toward Asgard. As he stood on the balcony of Jane's apartment, gazing at the stars, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something was coming. A storm was on the horizon, one that even the Thunder God could not escape. Then the message came. Volstagg, Fandral and Hogun arrived from Asgard, their faces grim. They had come for him. "I'm sorry, Thor," Volstagg said, his voice heavy with regret. "Loki commands it. You are to return with us." But Thor, his brow furrowing, saw through the lie in their eyes. Loki had lied. Loki had betrayed him. His heart sank. "No," Thor said firmly, clenching his fists. "Loki may have the scepter, but he will not have Asgard. Not while I breathe." Sif and Balder too arrived on Earth, their faces filled with the gravity of their message. "Thor, Loki has usurped the throne," Sif explained. "We must return, now." But before they could leave, the ground trembled, the sky darkened. Mangog had come. "It's too late," Balder said, his voice tight with urgency. "We must face him together." With no time to waste, the 6 heroes, Thor, Sif, Balder, Volstagg, Fandral and Hogun, set their course for Asgard, bringing Jane with them, for Thor could not leave her behind. The battle that awaited them was nothing less than the final war for Asgard's future. The realm was at stake, and with Mangog advancing, only the might of the Thunder God and his friends could stand between the end of Asgard and its salvation. As they crossed the Rainbow Bridge, Thor's heart burned with resolve. Loki's reign would not last. The scepter royal would be reclaimed, and Asgard would be restored. But first, they had to face the true terror that approached. Mangog, the harbinger of destruction. Chapter 3: Betrayal's Toll. The skies above Asgard were painted with chaos as the final battle raged on. Thunder cracked through the heavens, echoing the fury in Thor's heart. Below him, the armies of the trolls and storm giants surged forward, wreaking havoc on the golden city of the gods. But the most terrible threat was not from Loki's cruel minions, nor even from the treacherous Karnilla and her dark magic. It was the monstrous Mangog, whose roar shook the very foundations of Asgard itself. Thor's eyes blazed with a fire fueled by love, loss, and the need to protect his home. He wielded his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, with godlike fury, striking down enemy after enemy, his mind focused entirely on one thing, the salvation of Asgard. But even the Thunder God could not stop Mangog's destruction. The beast, born from the ashes of an ancient, annihilated race, tore through Asgardian forces like paper, leaving only carnage in his wake. And then came the scream, a mortal scream. Thor's heart dropped to his feet as he turned, his vision blurring. There, lying amidst the battlefield, was Jane Foster, his love, his mortal anchor, the one who had unknowingly captured his heart in ways he had never imagined. She lay unmoving, a pool of crimson blood spreading beneath her as the flames of battle raged around her. "No," Thor cried, his voice thick with sorrow. He rushed to her side, kneeling in the blood-soaked earth, his trembling hands lifting her broken form. His heart shattered as he saw the life fading from her eyes. "Thor, I'm sorry," Jane whispered weakly, her voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "I didn't understand. I didn't know." Thor's grief-stricken face was a mask of pain, his jaw tight as his tears fell freely. "No, Jane. No." His voice cracked, and in that moment the weight of his godhood felt unbearable. For all his strength, for all his immortality, he was powerless to save her. She smiled faintly, her lips trembling. "I'll always be with you, Thor, in your heart." And with that, the light in her eyes flickered out, leaving Thor alone amidst the carnage. His roar of anguish was like the fury of a storm, shaking the very heavens above. But the Thunder God's grief transformed into a burning rage. His eyes turned cold with vengeance, and his grip tightened around Mjolnir. He rose to his feet, his entire being consumed with the need to end the nightmare. He would make the gods pay. He would make Loki pay. Loki, atop the throne of Asgard, sneered as he watched the destruction unfold. His plan was almost complete. The scepter royal was his, and Thor's allies were scattered. His enemies lay broken and dying, and all that remained was for him to sit in triumph upon the throne forever. But even in his moment of victory, there was a shadow creeping toward him, a shadow that threatened to crush his very being. Mangog, once his ally, now turned its fury upon Loki, its enormous claws reaching for the usurper, threatening to crush him in one blow. For all the power he wielded, Loki was helpless against the might of the beast. But then a figure appeared before him, standing between him and certain death. Thor. "Evil though thou art, still I call thee brother," Thor bellowed, lifting Mjolnir high and striking down Mangog with the force of 1,000 storms. The beast, too powerful for any mortal weapon, was finally brought to its knees by the sheer might of the Thunder God's hammer. The earth itself shook as Mangog fell, disintegrating into nothingness. And with that, the sceptre royal was reclaimed. Thor's hands closed around it, feeling the immense power surge through his body, its weight a reminder of the responsibility he bore. He turned to face Loki, his gaze cold, his voice unwavering. "Your reign is over." Loki, his face twisted with fury and fear, backed away from the throne, his mind racing. But it was too late. Thor had won. And in the end, it was Odin himself who returned from his long slumber, his eyes filled with judgment. "The test is ended," Odin's voice rang out, his presence overwhelming. "The rightful heir to the throne of Asgard hath proven himself full well." Loki, his dreams of power shattered, was exiled from Asgard. His fate sealed, he was cast out into the cold void of space, where no god nor mortal could ever find him again. Karnilla, her heart still consumed by desire for the noble Balder, returned to the land of the Norns, her plans undone. The winds of Asgard carried a quiet sadness as Thor stood upon the fields of battle, his heart heavy with the loss of Jane Foster. The world around him was returning to peace, but for Thor, the price of victory had been too high. He could not stop the gnawing emptiness within him, the void where love once lived. Sif stood beside him, her hand on his arm. She, too, mourned Jane, for she had seen the love that Thor carried for the mortal. Yet, in the quiet of their shared grief, there was a stirring of something else, something tender and understanding. "I will always be by your side," Sif whispered softly, her voice a balm for his wounded heart. "No matter what comes, Thor, you are not alone." Thor turned to her, his expression a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. As he gazed into her eyes, he felt an unfamiliar warmth. It was not the same as his love for Jane, but it was real, a connection forged in their shared history, in their loyalty, and in their bond as warriors. And then, as if sensing his turmoil, Sif whispered something in his ear, something that made his heart skip. It was a phrase, a delicate line that Jane had once whispered to him on Earth. "Don't you see, Thor?" Sif murmured, her voice a mirror of Jane's. "I've always been here, always been with you. As you loved Jane, you loved me. And I loved you too." And then it hit him, the truth that had eluded him all this time. Jane Foster, the mortal nurse who had captured his heart, was more than she seemed. She was not two separate beings. Jane and Sif, they were one. It was Odin's doing. The All-Father had woven the threads of fate, creating Jane as an alter ego for Sif, one that Thor could never have recognized in the midst of his mortal life. His love for both women was a reflection of his love for Sif, for she had always been his true companion. The gods of Asgard stood in silence as the realization settled over Thor. The realm had been saved, the rightful heir to the throne had proven himself, and the power of the sceptre royal was once again secure. But even in victory, Thor knew there would always be a cost. A god's heart, no matter how powerful, could still be torn apart, and yet the gods were eternal. In time, Thor would heal, and Asgard would rise again, stronger, wiser, and united under the rule of its true king. But as the sun set over Asgard's shimmering gates, there was one thing Thor knew for certain. The storm was far from over. Loki's fury burned in the shadows, and though he was exiled, he would never cease his pursuit of power. The true battle for Asgard's future was only just beginning. But for now, peace reigned. For now, Thor could rest.